Hi, today we're going to talk about starting the PulsFOG. PulsFOG is actually a very simple system where we are trying to get combustion in this rear chamber. That's going to force exhaust and propulsion up the barrel. We're going to bleed some of the pressure off of the carburetor, pressurizing these two tanks. The tanks will pressurize the solution up to these valves. When we open these, that's going to allow the solution up to the nozzles at the front of the unit. The exhaust then is going to atomize and propel that solution as it's fogged into the room. It's a very simple system, as I said before. You have a carburetor, you have gas, you have a spark, and you have a valve that's basically the throttle that's going to allow the gas into the system. To start this system, the spark is only going to be used just at the starting, and then we're going to have a perpetual combustion in the rear of the unit once we get the ignition on the system. To start the system, we're going to push down on this ball, opening the fuel valve to an optimal amount. Pushing on the ball is going to force air and gas in the carburetor to blow past the spark plug. You're also going to activate the spark plug when pushing on this ball, which is going to ignite the gas and air mixture, which is going to start the combustion. It's very important with this when you're doing it to get comfortable with this. The PulsFOG is, like I said, a simple system, but it needs to be done in a fairly easy manner. Too often we get customers pushing not enough, or we get people pushing really hard. It doesn't do what we needed to do. For best operation, we would suggest hooking your fingers behind the unit on the frame, and you're going to push down in a good, stable manner like this. Don't push fast, push with a good, steady push, so that you're getting a constant supply of air and you're firing the spark through that whole push. Next is the amount of gas that we want to use. When it's shut off, it's turned here, and we don't need to turn it too hard to shut it off. We're simply stopping the flow of gas from the fuel system through the needle valve. Normally, if you look up here, this is going to work in some scenarios, but not in others. So we would generally recommend not going right to those settings on the dial on the label here. We would actually start at a much less open position, and then we're going to push on the ball with the intent of getting just a small amount of gas. If we start over here, chances are likely that you might flood the system. You'll give it too much gas, which will wet the spark plug. It won't ignite. Now we've got to clean the whole thing up. It's much better to start at a less gas position and work your way up until you're getting enough gas to ignite the system. Another trick that I like to use is when we get it to a position where it's starting to fire but not all the way there, I like to keep my thumb on it and give it gas as you start to hear sounds. So now we're gonna do that to see how that goes. Another thing that's important is when we're running this, we're going to increase the gasoline flow so that it sounds like a Harley Davidson, not a Honda. We want a very rough sound. We don't want a high-pitched whine. We want a lower tone. You want it to feel almost like it's about to choke out, like it's getting too much gas. That's going to give you more propulsion. It generally is going to burn a little bit cooler as well, so that we'll have less heat at the end of the barrel. Also, when turning off the unit, as you noticed, I didn't turn this too far. It's very easy. The way that the fuel line works is you have a fuel system coming up to a brass seat. The needle sits in that seat. If we turn this down too far, eventually over time you're going to start to wear that seat faster, and then you're going to not be able to control the flow of gas in as easily. Just turning it to a point where the gas stops and making sure that nothing's leaking through there is the best way to make that work. Next, what we want to do is run it so that we can show how to work the fuel system, and then we'll talk about shutting it down completely after an application. First, we'll start it up. So what we did there, first we opened, this is a bio PulsFOG unit. Some units have 2 tanks, others have 1. If you have a unit with 2 tanks, there's a water tank and a solution tank. When we're using biopesticides, we want, and other heat sensitive products, we want the rear tank to cool the exhaust and protect those biopesticides from damage. We always want to open that valve first. Then we would open the solution valve. You notice the fog that was coming out of the machine. When we turn it off, we want to do it in the reverse order. We want to close the solution valve first, then the water valve, and then when we know we're shutting it off, we want to depressurize the tank before cutting off the fuel. And we do that because there's pressure coming off of the carburetor here that's filling those tanks with air pressure. Well, once the engine stops, that pressure is now relieved from going in. Solution can come backwards. It'll generally get to a check valve, but we don't want it to get into the fuel system. So relieving the pressure is just a good safety to make sure that happens. Of course, closing the valves should prevent that in most instances. This is an extra measure, but if you ever shut it off with the valves open, that can be a problem that'll occur.